Hi, this is Greg from Ocean Quest. This video is going to discuss the different configurations that people use for alternate air source use. So one will be the Air 2. We'll talk about a couple considerations with a traditional alternate air source. And then finally we'll talk about the long hose. All right, so let's take a look at what's commonly referred to as the Air 2 system. So the Air 2 is a regulator that's integrated into the BCD inflator-deflator mechanism like this. So it's attached to the hose, and then this would normally be permanently attached to the BCD just like normal. Now, with this configuration, I have my primary regulator here, but in many cases I don't have an Octopus, as that this is designed to offer the air sharing options for the diver and the team. So if somebody were to come up to me and they were out of air, I would actually have to donate to them my primary regulator. And so a couple issues with that. So first of all, if people aren't comfortable taking their regulators out, then that might cause the situation to be a little bit more stressful. But also you'll find that this regulator is actually quite short, right? This hose, especially when you compare it to the length of an Octopus. So when I donate my primary, there's not a lot of room between me and the diver that I'm donating to. So that can make it a very, very cumbersome when we're trying to share air, especially again when the stress is a little bit elevated. Now, in addition to that, swimming with this will be very challenging as well, because they're either going to be bumping into me on the right side, or in this situation we probably suggest they go on the left side, but even then there's not a lot of room for them to swim beside without us really crawling all over each other, which again, not very comfortable. Now, the other thing is that as I'm donating this to my buddy, I now have to find air for myself. So that's where this comes into play. So I would actually have to take this and place that in my mouth and breathe from it. And what you'll find is that because this is down here, that I have to probably look down to try to find it. And in doing so, I'm actually taking eye contact away from the person that's actually stressed and out of air. And so that also potentially can cause other issues of control and comfort level between the team. So finally, when I have this in my regulator, this regulator in my mouth, and so they're donating here, I've got this here. Now again, we're trying to swim or we're trying to ascend, and so I have to control my buoyancy with my inflator-deflator mechanism while I'm sharing air and breathing from the actual device that I'm doing that. So I may even have to try to take this out of my mouth to dump gas out of the BCD, which again isn't very comfortable. I can always use other pull dumps, but that potentially is another issue with this, especially because a lot of people use muscle memory, and that's probably their main way of inflating and deflating air from their BCD. So the other thing too is that these things don't breathe very well. So you'll find that that I'm going to give somebody a pretty good breathing regulator and then take something that probably doesn't breathe as well. So so our opinion with Air 2s is really it's not the best option for people for using in a real life situation. Sure, it may seem like it's more streamlined initially, but when you actually use it in practice, it becomes very cumbersome very quickly. All right, so now let's talk about the more traditional alternate air source configuration, where we have a separate alternate air source coming from our regulators. So in this situation, as we all know, you're breathing from your primary regulator here, and then if somebody has an out of air or low on air emergency, they can come up and grab this from your BCD where it's attached, nice and streamlined, not dragging in the dirt and so forth, very visible, and they can pull that off the retainer and essentially retrieve that. Now, this system does work fairly well for most divers, but there are a couple things. So here we have an alternate air source that's coming from the traditional right-hand side. And you know, there's really not that I know of any background on why it comes from the right, outside of the fact that our primary comes from the right, so why not have the alternate come from the right as well. But in actual use of this, there are some drawbacks. And so most alternate air sources, especially ones that breathe properly, are still made with traditional design, which means that they have a right side up and an upside down like that. And so we can look at that just with how the exhaust tees are. So that's of course right side up, and that's upside down. Now if I take a look at offering this to somebody, if I were to offer it the natural hose direction like this, where I'm going to get the most length out of the hose and it's very normal, doesn't have any unusual kinks or anything, the regulator actually goes in upside down to the diver. And if that happens, then as they breathe out, water will come in through the exhaust tees and they'll actually get more water than they will air. So that's not a good thing. Now, to alleviate that, of course, now we have to make sure that the regulator goes in on the right side. Now, you can see that I've shortened the hose quite a bit. And so to make this happen, the hose kind of gets kinked up a little bit funny, and now I've got the diver that's much closer to me. And so things can get, again, a little bit awkward, just like the Air 2. It's better than the Air 2, of course, because the hose is longer, but it's still a bit awkward when you're trying to maneuver with people. Now, if somebody was to swim with me and I'm donating air, then I would want to put them on my left-hand side, because again, I'm going to get a little bit more comfort out of this, and we can both dive horizontally and we can swim properly. But if I go on the right-hand side, again, you know, the hose is really kinked funny, and they're going to be basically just nudging right up against me. So when I put it here, I've got this hose coming across my neck. I can alleviate that a little bit by going behind my head if I was thoughtful enough about it. And actually, you will notice that I get a tiny bit more length out of it too. So that's okay. But it does kink the hose quite a bit. So it works. It's the traditional thing. You'll see this the most often, but it's not ideal. So next we're going to talk about putting this on the left-hand side instead. Okay, so let's continue to talk a little bit about the traditional configuration where we have a primary regulator and a separate alternate air source. But in this case, we have the alternate air source on the left-hand side versus the right-hand side where we often see it. So now the benefits here are when people grab this, or if I hand this off to somebody, the hose is natural like this, but the regulator is right side up. So you can see that when they take that, they're going to get air instead of water like we described before. And so that's obviously a benefit, and we have the most length of the hose, so we can have as much distance from ourselves as possible or from each other. And so the other thing is if we need to do a little swim, then the same thing is I'll have the diver go on my left-hand side, but because the hose is now more natural coming off the regulator, then again, I have lots of room, and it's a lot more comfortable for us to dive, and we can still dive, you know, horizontally, so we can swim properly and so forth, and maintain control over the regulator and the diver and so forth. Now, the other thing I like about the left-hand side is, as an instructor, there's often situations where I'm giving an alternate air source to somebody and I need to have control over them in case that they are feeling uncomfortable or something like that. So the way I can hold on to this is very comfortable. So I can hold on to the hose, and then I can put my thumb on the purge button like that so I can offer it to somebody. And then with my right hand, I can even hold on to somebody by their BCD or something. And so I can offer this to them. I can purge it for them if I want. I can have good control. So I'm really keeping them safe in all aspects. So they have air, which is important. I'm going to make sure that they don't do a rapid ascent or lose air if they try to bolt to the surface and not have a regulator or something like that. So it's good control for an instructor, or if you're an experienced diver or rescue diver and you find that you're in that situation. So because of that, we actually find that the alternate air source on the left-hand side works very, very well for divers that want to use this style of configuration. So that's something that we'd recommend. Okay, so let's take a look at the long hose configuration for air sharing. So some of you may have seen this and some maybe not, but essentially how it's set up is that we have typically a 7-foot long hose like this, and then we have a secondary regulator, a backup regulator that comes around our shoulder. It's on a bungee necklace, and it just basically hangs underneath my chin like that, so it's very easy to access. So the regulator that I would be breathing from throughout the dive would be my long hose like this, and that's called my primary. And so if somebody was out of air, then what I would have to do is I would have to offer them my long hose regulator, and then I would go to my backup and give that to myself. And so the benefits of the long hose are, once I have it deployed and I can bring it over my shoulder, you can see that I have lots of room with the hose, so I can give it to somebody. We can give ourselves some space so we're not bumping into each other. We can have good eye contact when we're ascending. If we do need to swim, I can have them swim in front of me, single file. If I'm in an overhead environment, I can have them swim to the right side of me very easily. I can have them swim to the left side of me very easily as well. And so in all cases, we have lots of room. And then, like I said, when we ascend, we can ascend face to face in good horizontal position at the same level throughout the ascent, which is very good. So some of the potential challenges with the long hose, and this is why it's really important that you get proper training with anything. So when I'm offering the regulator, of course, now I have to take this one out of my mouth, and I'm going to have a few moments without a regulator. And that's okay, because again, with practice and experience and so forth, you should be comfortable with that. But at the same time, my focus needs to be on the diver that I'm donating air to. I don't want to be focused on the fact that I have to do this. So there's a lot of times where I can be looking at somebody or looking at something, but really mentally I'm somewhere else, and I don't want to be there. So you need to be very comfortable handing this off, and then at some point grabbing this. But this, in some cases, is really secondary, although our safety is important too. But we want to make sure that we're comfortable enough that we don't need to just grab this really quickly and be noticeably uncomfortable. Now, the other thing is that when I have this set up, you can see it's actually a very streamlined system. So there's no hoses coming outside of my body width, which is nice. But if you don't manage the long hose properly while you're underwater, which means securing it somehow down by the waist belt, then what can happen is that you can get the hose coming up like this. And on land here, it doesn't look too bad, but underwater, what's going to happen is this hose is going to loop over top of your head, potentially can snag on something, which can pull your regulator out. It's obviously not very streamlined, and it's a bit sloppy. So again, making sure that you get good training on using a long hose, how you configure it, donating. Also buoyancy can be an issue as well, because I'm taking the regulator out of my mouth. And then until I put this one back in, I've lost my lung control for buoyancy, because I can't obviously breathe in. I can breathe out and lower my buoyancy and become a bit more negative, but I can't breathe in to fill my lungs or anything like that. So when we're trying to match another diver's buoyancy, that's again another important consideration as well. But having said all that, certainly I would think that, in my opinion, the long hose is the easiest or the best way to share air when you get comfortable with it, because you're going to get the most space. It's going to probably cause the least amount of stress, and it will be very effective in many different situations. Again, just regular ascent. If we have to swim somewhere, we have lots of room to ascend. And then if you ever transition into wreck diving, or if you get into cave diving or something like that, then in its configuration that you'd use to swim single file along a line and find your exit.